Hello, I'm going to be talking about Russia. But before that, I'm going to tell you that talking about Russia, it's pretty cold round here at the moment, and I spent yesterday making myself a riding skirt out of fleece, not wool fleece, you know, that weatherproof fleece. And I spent the whole day doing it, so I didn't make a video. And I have to tell you, it cleared my mind because I've been really busy with videos over the past few weeks, and you sort of get a pile-up of what in a fireplace would be called clinker, you know, the ashes of all the stuff that you didn't quite burn in your video. So it was good, and I got a nice riding skirt out of it, so when the wind drops and I can actually take my horse out, at least I'm going to be warm. Now, let's get into the Russian winter. First of all, I want to ask you Americans, why this obsession with Russia? What is this thing about Russia? And don't you realise that China is the big enemy? Russia isn't your enemy. I mean, yeah, you're going to have spats with Russia. But China is working on undermining American society, and that's a completely different kettle of fish, isn't it? Well, not just American society. All right, so let's get back to Russia. The Democrats, if you've ever... what happened with the British Empire? I'm sorry I'm jumping around a bit, but you'll see I am actually making my way to a serious point. The British went out into the rest of the world to pillage, to gain resources, to bring in all the riches of the world. But after a while, being a relatively moral people, they had to invent for themselves a reason to be there. They had to say they were a force of good. Now, in many cases, they were. You know, any conquering is not good, but they did reasonable things, like they built railways and they instituted relatively uncorrupt bureaucracy and well, one of the greatest gifts, which was totally unplanned, was the English language, which is uniting the world. Okay, but they had to really tell themselves that they were there for a moral purpose. And Kipling wrote a poem, I think it was Kipling, called The White Man's Burden, about how the white people were going to go out into the world, and he was referring, of course, to the British people more than any others, going out in the world, and they were carrying the native savages with them. You know, that was their burden. And of course, what happened was the British started to believe in their own myth, and they started to do more good than take from, and they ended up bankrupting themselves. Well, this is what is happening with Russia and America in a different way. The Democrats took this idea of the Russians puppeteering Trump, and they got this idea of big bad Russia, the bear, about to eat the American, I don't know what, the American eagle, which is slightly impossible anyway, but yeah, let's not go there. So the Russians were going to gain control of the USA because they were going to run Trump. And they got this idea of big bad Russia so deeply ingrained that when Trump had gone, they had to carry on with the story. And now, of course, it's big bad Russia starting a war over Ukraine. So it's true that Russia is a power that you have to respect and reckon with. But I actually don't think it's quite a coincidence that the minute that America finishes with Afghanistan and brings all its troops back, suddenly it looks like they're trying to start a war over the Ukraine. It just does not seem just a coincidence. This constant fear of Russia. I mean, America went into Afghanistan over Russia, didn't it? And in many cases, that was a reasonable idea at the time. Now, let's just look at a map of Russia. I want you to understand the Russian mind. Look, I'm not a professional historian. I'm not a professional geographer. So this is my idea. It may not be backed up by history, but I think it's a reasonable idea anyway. Here's a map of Russia, and you see, well, Russia, you see it extends all the way from here, which is right next to Alaska, all the way over here, past Moscow, to the borders of Latvia, Belarus and the Ukraine. And it seems like a huge country, an enormous place. And when I hesitated before about saying the word Russia, that was because this area is a complete spectrum of human cultures, races and ways of dealing with the weather. And you have to consider the weather when you're talking about Russia, because the weather is extremely important in Russia. Now, look at the border here. Can you, if there weren't this line here, would you be able to tell the difference between Russia and Belarus and Poland and the Ukraine and Slovakia and Czechia and all the rest of it? No, you wouldn't. And the only reason you can tell the difference between Russia and Finland is because there's quite a bit of water there between the two places. As a matter of fact, of course, there are hills and mountains and all the rest of it, but basically it's a long plain. And if you look at this across here and then all the way over to this where the word says Russia, and then all the way over to here, it's a huge plain. Of course, there are mountains, there are rivers and all the rest of it, but basically it's a fairly easy ride to run tanks across. Now, the Germans found, and they saw the same geography, and they thought, well, look, there's no distance at all to Moscow, and it's flat as a pancake. Let's run our tanks there. And that's where the weather comes in. It was the weather that saved Russia and Stalin. All right, so we've got that established. I'm interrupting myself. I got so involved with Russia that I forgot to give the channel a plug. So I'm going to do that now. I am Grannyopteryx and I am on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute and Minds. I do ask you to like whatever platform you're on and share, and please subscribe, and this is most important for YouTube viewers because YouTube keeps desubscribing people, unsubscribing them or whatever without their knowledge. So just check that your subscription is still working. All right, that's it. And support my channel if you can. All right, back to the main event. If you look at Russia, you will see that it is subject to invasion. Just geographically, it's quite easy to nibble bits off the edges. And as a matter of fact, Russia spends a lot of its annual income just maintaining outposts. You see Moscow is right the way over here. But there are towns all the way across this plain, and none of them self-sufficient, or very close to not self-sufficient, because of the weather, because of the type of land. And because of that, what happens is all the taxes and income generated by Russia in this bit round Moscow, much of it goes to paying for subsidised food and railway systems and cranky, creaky air services all the way over to the other side. Because these people don't have the ability to protect themselves or to feed themselves, but Russia wants them out there because otherwise everything would be round here, round Moscow, and there would be, China and other states would rise up in the east to nibble away at the Russian plain. And then on the European side, of course, Russia is quite well armed, but it is still subject to troops just walking across. Now, just imagine I just want you to put yourself into that situation. It's like you're living in a house with all the doors open. There are doors you cannot close, doors you can't lock, just open doorways. That's what is in the Russian mind. When a Russian grows up, a Russian knows that the Mongols came across and turned the area, which we now call Russia, into a series of vassal tribes. And the Mongols just came across and they just exacted taxation and bribery and protection money, and then they went away, but they kept coming back because Russia had no way of stopping them. And if you look, so I'm going to move this map over to, oh, I can't move it over now. Ah, here we are. I'm going to move this map over to America. So you see here, we have America. It's got Mexico at the southern border, and it stole Texas to sort of help to even up that border. So it's got a small border at the bottom, and at the top it's got Canada, which is underpopulated, and it's no threat. And furthermore, it's surrounded because America got Alaska as well. And on either side, there's the sea. It's not the same. You are not surrounded. You are not subject to invasion in that way. Britain too. Britain's in an even better situation, at least has been up to fairly recently, when missiles and rockets and very fast aeroplanes have reduced the problems of getting into the British Isles. But the fact is that Britain has always been self-assured about invasions. The Second World War, they were worried about invasion because that was the beginning of the air battles. But even so, we have always had this feeling of insulation from the troubles of the continent, because that's our mentality. We have grown up in a house where we can lock the doors. That's not the case in Russia. And if we go back to, if I can move this map again, no I can't, it takes a while. But look here at Ukraine. Sorry, I just want to get onto something else. If you look at Russia, for all its size, it doesn't have much in the way of sea communications. The top half of Russia is frozen out for 6-7 months of the year, maybe even more, I don't know. It's got the Baltic Sea, it's got access to the Baltic Sea only in this little bit just below Finland, so that's why it wanted Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania as client areas. I believe there are exclaves there, Russian exclaves somewhere in those places, I'm not entirely sure, which provide it access to the sea. It's got the China Sea over on the other side, which is a long way away from their centres of population. Now, you may say, why don't they have more centres of population there? Probably they should have. And the only warm water port that Russia really has good access to, at least Moscow, is in the Black Sea. And that's why they took that peninsula there from the Ukraine, because they wanted to be able to get out into the Mediterranean, and they've still got Turkey in the way there, so there are still problems, but at least they can, it's what they call warm water ports. It's the thing that Russian leaders have always been obsessed with. And now Ukraine is thinking of joining NATO. Do you see why Russia should be cutting up rough over this? I'm not suggesting that it's good that Putin is threatening Ukraine. What I am suggesting is that we should be more understanding of their worries and try and work round it, instead of all that tub thumping and drum banging and big bad Russia hysteria that seems to be being whipped up in America, which is going to cause trouble. Look, if you've got a neighbour and a bit of land between the two of you. This happens a lot in Britain. You have semi-detached houses. So there are two houses joined together. And between the sides of both of these houses, I'll find a picture. You often find there is one driveway between these two houses. And the garages are in the back garden. So you have to go up that single driveway to get to your garage, two people. Now, you frequently find that neighbours are at odds with each other about that. And one of them leaves wheelbarrows or rubbish or something in that drive, which means that the other one can't gain access to their own garages, to their own garage. And this causes fights. And it's quite a similar situation here, writ very small. Now, the neighbour that keeps getting inconvenienced can either go round and punch his neighbour on the nose or try to come to some sort of an accommodation. And it's irritating when somebody is getting in the way and all the rest of it. But there are only two ways of doing it, and the violent way is frequently the least constructive. All right, well, that's where I'm going to leave that. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the Graniopteryx design or Grambo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.graniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share, share, share.